The Middle East stands today on the razor's edge of a precipice, where a single misstep could ignite a conflagration that shifts the very foundations of the global order. We are no longer observing a localized struggle for regional dominance, but rather a high-stakes geopolitical drama, where the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran are locked in a dangerous dance that threatens to spiral into World War III. The landscape of 2024 is vastly different from the decades of tension that preceded it. Following the seismic shifts of the post-October 7th era, the shadow of conflict has lengthened, casting a dark veil over some of the world's most critical trade routes and strategic corridors. At the heart of this escalating crisis is the direct friction between the U.S. administration and the Iranian supreme leadership, a rivalry that has transcended mere diplomatic disagreement to become a fundamental clash of ideologies and national security imperatives. In this volatile theater, the Iranian supreme leadership utilizes the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, as its primary instrument of influence and disruption. The IRGC does not fight alone. It commands a formidable and ideologically aligned network known as the Axis of Resistance. This coalition, spanning from the mountains of Yemen to the Mediterranean coast, includes the battle-hardened forces of Hezbollah, various militias in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthi rebels. Together, they form a web of proxy power that allows Tehran to project force far beyond its borders while maintaining a degree of plausible deniability. Facing them is the U.S. administration, a governing body currently focused on an increasingly difficult mission of diplomatic containment, regional stability, and military deterrence. The challenge for Washington is immense: how to respond to provocative actions without triggering the very all-out war they seek to avoid. The map of this confrontation is expansive, covering the deep blue waters of the Persian Gulf and the narrow, vital choke point of the Strait of Hormuz. It stretches across the Red Sea and into the fractured landscapes of Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. This is a gray zone of warfare, where the lines between peace and conflict are perpetually blurred. The primary drivers of this escalation are twofold. First, there is the catastrophic breakdown of diplomatic channels that once offered a glimmer of hope for a nuclear settlement. Second, the acceleration of Iran's nuclear enrichment programs has shortened the breakout time toward a weapon, a reality monitored with growing alarm by the IAEA. As diplomacy fails, the strategic calculus on both sides shifts toward kinetic options, making a direct exchange more likely than at any point in the last half-century. The shift from a covert shadow war to overt confrontation is most visible in the recent surge of drone and missile attacks targeting U.S. military bases across the Middle East. These strikes, often launched by militias within the Axis of Resistance, have drawn lethal American responses, creating an escalatory ladder that both sides are climbing with grim determination. Perhaps even more destabilizing is the maritime crisis unfolding in the Red Sea. Houthi disruptions of international shipping are viewed by the U.S. administration not as isolated acts of piracy, but as a coordinated Iranian-backed effort to destabilize global trade and exert leverage over the West. When the world's largest container ships are forced to reroute around the entire continent of Africa to avoid missile fire, the economic consequences begin to ripple through every household on the planet. This transition signifies that the era of hidden strikes and deniable sabotage is coming to an end. The Iranian supreme leadership is increasingly willing to show its hand, demonstrating its asymmetric strength through missile density and sophisticated suicide drones that challenge even the most advanced Western defense systems. Meanwhile, the U.S. administration must weigh the necessity of defending its assets against the risk of sparking a regional firestorm. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The ticking clock of this conflict shows no signs of slowing down as we move deeper into an era of unprecedented uncertainty and danger where every naval maneuver in the Gulf is scrutinized by a nervous world. The transition from regional friction to a potential global conflagration is no longer a distant theory. It is a reality unfolding in real time across the sands and seas of the Middle East. To understand this modern precipice, one must look back to the foundational rupture of 1979. The Islamic Revolution did more than just change Iran's government. It fundamentally reordered the geopolitical map of the Middle East, turning a key American ally into its most steadfast adversary overnight. For decades, this friction was managed through containment and shadow operations, but the landscape shifted dramatically with the rise and fall of the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. This nuclear deal was intended to freeze Iran's nuclear ambitions in exchange for sanctions relief. When the U.S. administration withdrew from the agreement in 2018, it initiated a maximum pressure campaign designed to cripple the Iranian economy. Instead of the anticipated capitulation, this move triggered a period of defiant escalation that has characterized recent years. The Iranian supreme leadership responded by leaning even more heavily into its doctrine of strategic depth. Realizing they could not match the U.S. military in a conventional conflict, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps perfected the art of asymmetric warfare. This strategy relies on the axis of resistance, a network of proxies that acts as a forward defense for Tehran. By empowering groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and various militias across Iraq and Syria, the IRGC created a reality where any American strike on Iranian soil could trigger a retaliatory firestorm across the entire region. This network allows Iran to exert influence and strike at its enemies while maintaining enough distance to complicate any direct military response from Washington. The IRGC operates as both a military and an economic entity, ensuring that the Iranian supreme leadership maintains a firm grip on both domestic stability and regional power projection. On a technical level, the disparity between the two nations is stark but deceptive. The U.S. administration commands a military machine of unparalleled technological and air superiority. From stealth fighters to carrier strike groups, American power is designed for overwhelming dominance. However, Iran has countered this by investing heavily in what it calls the weapons of the poor: ballistic missile stockpiles, suicide drones like the Shahed series, and fleets of fast-attack naval craft. In the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz, a massive American aircraft carrier becomes a target for swarming tactics that seek to overwhelm defensive systems through sheer volume. These Iranian capabilities are not meant to win a total war, but to make the cost of such a war so prohibitively high that the West is deterred from initiating any large-scale strike. Adding to this tension is the relentless ticking of the nuclear clock. Recent reports from the IAEA indicate that Iran's uranium enrichment has reached 60% purity, dangerously close to the 90% required for weapons-grade material. The breakout time, the duration required to produce enough material for a single nuclear warhead, has shrunk to mere weeks, a development that keeps defense officials in Washington awake at night. This places the U.S. administration in a desperate bind. Every day of diplomatic stalemate brings the Iranian supreme leadership closer to a nuclear capability that would permanently alter the balance of power. While the world watches the missile silos, an invisible front has also opened in the digital realm. Cyber warfare has become a constant, with both nations engaging in state-sponsored hacking attempts targeting critical infrastructure in a silent struggle for control that could have devastating consequences. The volatility is further compounded by internal pressures. Within Iran, years of heavy sanctions have devastated the economy, leading to inflation and civil unrest. The Iranian supreme leadership often views foreign policy aggression as a means of domestic distraction, using the narrative of the Great Satan to unify a fractured population and justify the IRGC's domestic dominance. Meanwhile, in Washington, a political divide persists regarding the correct path forward. One faction argues that military intervention is the only way to stop a nuclear-armed Iran, while another maintains that diplomatic containment is the only route that avoids another decades-long war. This domestic debate creates a sense of unpredictability in American policy, leaving allies and adversaries alike guessing at the U.S. administration's next move. As these forces collide, the prospect of a tactical miscalculation grows, leading toward a future where the shadow war may finally burst into the light of open conflict. As the shadow war threatens to emerge into the light, the most immediate and catastrophic consequence of a full-scale confrontation centers on a single narrow waterway: the Strait of Hormuz. Through this vital choke point flows roughly 1/5 of the world's total oil consumption. The Iranian supreme leadership has long signaled that if their back is pushed against the wall, they possess the asymmetric capability to close the strait using the IRGC's naval mines and fast attack swarms. Such an event would send global markets into a tailspin, triggering a worldwide economic depression. For the U.S. administration, maintaining the freedom of navigation is not merely a tactical objective, but a requirement for global economic survival. Beyond the immediate economic fallout, a direct clash would solidify a dangerous new era of geopolitical realignment. No longer is Iran isolated. The nation has increasingly integrated into a strategic alliance with Russia and China. This deepening relationship is fueled by shared interests in challenging Western hegemony. Russia, reliant on Iranian-manufactured drones, views the survival of the Iranian regime as essential to its southern flank. China, as the primary buyer of sanctioned Iranian oil, sees Tehran as a crucial partner. A U.S.-led strike on Iran would likely force these global powers to take a side, transforming a regional dispute into a global conflict that could reshape the modern age. The human cost of such a war would be equally devastating for the region. The collapse of central authority in neighboring states like Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon would trigger humanitarian crises of unprecedented scale. The axis of resistance, if mobilized in a total war, would likely turn the entire Levant into a scorched earth battlefield. Millions of refugees would likely flee towards stable regions, creating social and political pressures that could destabilize governments far beyond the Middle East. The regional destabilization would effectively erase the progress made toward economic integration, plunging the area back into a dark age of sectarian and state-sponsored violence. Despite these grim prospects, the diplomatic path remains a flickering hope. Some analysts suggest a grand bargain could still be reached, a comprehensive agreement that addresses not only nuclear enrichment, but also regional proxy activities and ballistic missile development. However, the trust deficit between the U.S. administration and the Iranian supreme leadership is at an all-time high. For a de-escalation agreement to hold, both sides would need to make concessions that their respective domestic hardliners currently find unacceptable. In Washington, the political cost of appearing weak on Iran is high, while in Tehran, the IRGC views hostility toward the West as the primary justification for its own existence. Perhaps the most terrifying prospect is the accidental war scenario. In a theater of war where thousands of drones, missiles, and naval vessels are in constant proximity, the margin for error is razor-thin. A mid-level commander in the Persian Gulf misinterpreting a maneuver or a single tactical miscalculation during a Red Sea intercept could trigger an unstoppable escalatory ladder. Once the first shot is fired, the political pressure on both the U.S. administration and the Iranian supreme leadership to respond with overwhelming force becomes almost irresistible. This ticking time bomb is not just about intentional aggression, but about the loss of control in a hyper-tense, high-stakes military environment. Looking forward, the international community must closely monitor the reports from the IAEA and the outcomes of upcoming regional summits. Every advancement in Iran's nuclear facilities or the IRGC's missile silos brings the world closer to a point of no return. The balance of power currently rests on a fragile foundation of mutual deterrence that could crumble at any moment. As 2024 unfolds, the world remains a spectator to a high-stakes game of brinkmanship where the cost of failure is a global war. The ticking continues, and the window for a peaceful resolution is closing, leaving the global community to navigate a future defined by the shadow of the most dangerous flashpoint on Earth. Every single day that passes without a diplomatic breakthrough increases the weight of this uncertainty.